Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, friends. It's a joy to be with you today, and I pray you're ready to hear a word of encouragement that will uplift your spirit and strengthen your faith. Let me ask you, how do you begin your day? Do you rush into the busyness of life? Or do you take time to connect with the one who holds your life in his hands? The 23rd Psalm is a treasure, a timeless declaration of God's care, provision, and guidance. Trusting in the Lord as your shepherd is foundational to a life of peace, purpose, and assurance. When we think of a shepherd, we envision someone who provides constant care, guidance, and protection for their flock. This imagery is deeply comforting because it reflects the very nature of God in our lives. As our shepherd, he is not distant or uninvolved. Instead, he is intimately aware of every detail of our journey, always present to lead us in the right direction and provide for our needs. The role of the shepherd is not passive. It is active and intentional. The shepherd knows the sheep by name, understands their weaknesses, and anticipates their needs even before they are aware of them. This is a beautiful representation of how God relates to us. His knowledge of us is complete. He knows our fears, desires, and struggles, and he cares for us personally and individually. Trusting him as our shepherd means believing that he truly has our best interests at heart, even when we cannot see the full picture. Life often presents uncertainties and challenges that can leave us feeling lost or overwhelmed. It's in these moments that the concept of God as our shepherd becomes so vital. He leads us along the right paths, even when those paths seem unclear or difficult. Our trust in him grows when we remember that his perspective is infinitely greater than ours. He sees the end from the beginning and orchestrates every step for our good and his glory. Trusting him means surrendering our need to control and relying on his infinite wisdom and unfailing love. The shepherd's role also involves provision, and this is another aspect of trust that we must embrace. Sheep depend entirely on the shepherd to provide for their needs, whether it's food, water, or shelter. Similarly, we must depend on God for our spiritual, emotional, and physical sustenance. Trusting him as our shepherd means believing that he will provide exactly what we need when we need it. It may not always be what we expect or desire in the moment, but his provision is always perfect and sufficient. Another aspect of trusting the Lord as our shepherd is recognizing his protection over our lives. A shepherd is vigilant, always watching over the flock to guard them against harm. When predators approach, the shepherd stands between the danger and the sheep, willing to risk his own life for their safety. In the same way, God shields us from threats we may not even realize exist. Trusting him means resting in the assurance that he is constantly at work to protect us, both seen and unseen. This trust extends to following his voice. Sheep learn to recognize the voice of their shepherd and respond to it with confidence, even in the midst of noise and confusion. In our spiritual walk, we are called to develop the same sensitivity to God's voice. This requires spending time in his word, praying, and seeking his guidance. Trusting him means believing that he will lead us clearly and faithfully, even when the way forward seems uncertain. Finally, trusting the Lord as our shepherd involves embracing his unfailing commitment to us. A shepherd doesn't abandon the flock when difficulties arise. Instead, he stays close, ensuring their safety and well-being. In the same way, God promises to never leave us or forsake us. His presence is constant, his care is unwavering, and his love is eternal. Trusting him as our shepherd is not just a one-time decision, it's a daily choice to place our confidence in his goodness and surrender our lives to his perfect guidance. Resting in God's green pastures is a profound expression of trust and surrender. The imagery of green pastures signifies a place of abundance, peace, and refreshment. For sheep, these pastures represent safety and provision, a space where they can lie down without fear or anxiety. For us, it symbolizes the deep rest and restoration that only God can provide for our weary souls. To rest in his green pastures is to recognize that he alone is the source of true peace and contentment. Life often feels like a relentless race, filled with pressures, expectations, and challenges that can drain us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It's easy to become caught up in striving, constantly seeking to achieve or control outcomes in our own strength. Yet God invites us to step away from this constant striving and into His rest. His green pastures are not earned or created by our efforts. They are a gift, freely offered to those who trust in Him. Resting in these pastures requires us to let go of the burdens we carry and allow Him to restore our souls. The act of lying down in green pastures is also a posture of surrender. Sheep only lie down when they feel completely safe and satisfied. In the same way, we can only truly rest in God when we trust in His care and provision. This trust allows us to release our fears and anxieties, knowing that He is watching over us. It's a reminder that we don't have to carry the weight of our worries alone. We can lay them at His feet and find peace in His presence. Resting in God's green pastures is not just about physical rest, but also about spiritual renewal. It's in these moments of rest that we draw closer to Him, experiencing His love and grace in a deeper way. The green pastures are a place where our souls are nourished by His Word and refreshed by His Spirit. As we spend time in His presence, we are reminded of His promises and His faithfulness, which strengthens our faith and restores our hope. The green pastures also reflect God's abundant provision for our needs. Just as a shepherd leads the sheep to lush pastures where they can graze, God leads us to places of plenty where our needs are met. This provision is not limited to material blessings. It includes the peace, joy, and strength that come from abiding in Him. Resting in His provision means trusting that He will supply everything we need, even in seasons when resources seem scarce or circumstances feel overwhelming. Another important aspect of resting in God's green pastures is learning to be still. In a world that constantly demands our attention and energy, stillness can feel counterintuitive or even uncomfortable. Yet it is in the stillness that we can hear God's voice and experience His presence more fully. Resting in Him requires us to step away from the noise and busyness of life, creating space to connect with Him on a deeper level. This stillness allows us to realign our hearts with His will and find clarity in His guidance. Finally, resting in God's green pastures reminds us of His desire for us to live in peace. The world often offers counterfeit versions of peace that are fleeting and dependent on external circumstances. In contrast, the peace that God provides is steadfast and unshakable, rooted in His character and promises. Resting in Him allows us to experience this peace, even in the midst of life's storms. It's a peace that guards our hearts and minds, enabling us to face challenges with confidence and trust in His sovereignty. Walking fearlessly through life's valleys is a powerful expression of faith in God's presence and protection. The valleys represent the difficult and uncertain seasons we all face, moments of pain, loss, fear, or confusion. These experiences can feel overwhelming, but they are also opportunities to draw closer to God and trust in His unwavering care. When we rely on His guidance, we can navigate these valleys with courage, knowing that we are never alone. Fear often arises in the valleys of life because they are unfamiliar and predictable. The shadows of uncertainty can cause us to feel vulnerable, as though we are surrounded by danger or despair. Yet God's promise is clear. Even in the darkest valley, He is with us. His presence dispels fear, providing comfort and assurance in the midst of our struggles. Walking fearlessly does not mean that we ignore the challenges or pretend they don't exist. Rather, it means choosing to trust in God's ability to lead us through them. The key to walking fearlessly is understanding who God is and what He has promised. As our shepherd, He goes before us, preparing the way and ensuring that no obstacle is too great for His power. His faithfulness is a constant reminder that we are not abandoned in our trials. Instead, He walks alongside us, providing strength, guidance, and protection every step of the way. This assurance allows us to move forward with confidence, even when the path ahead is unclear or daunting. God's protection is also evident in His rod and staff, tools that symbolize His authority and care. The rod is a weapon of defense used to ward off threats and ensure the safety of the flock. The staff, with its gentle curve, is used to guide and rescue the sheep when they stray. Together, these tools demonstrate God's active involvement in our lives, safeguarding us from harm and keeping us on the right path. Knowing that He wields His rod and staff on our behalf brings comfort and security, enabling us to face life's valleys without fear. Walking through the valley also requires a mindset of dependence on God. It is tempting to rely on our own strength or understanding when faced with challenges, but this often leads to frustration and exhaustion. God invites us to lean on Him, trusting that His wisdom and power are sufficient to carry us through. This dependence is not a sign of weakness, but of faith, acknowledging that He is greater than any difficulty we may encounter. The valleys of life are also opportunities for growth and transformation. While they may be painful or uncomfortable, they refine our character and deepen our relationship with God. In these moments, we learn to trust Him more fully, recognizing that He is using the experience to shape us into the people He created us to be. Walking fearlessly through the valley means embracing the process, even when it is difficult, and believing that God is working all things together for our good. Another aspect of walking fearlessly is keeping our eyes fixed on God rather than on our circumstances. It is easy to become consumed by the challenges around us, allowing fear and doubt to take hold. But when we focus on God and His promises, we are reminded of His greatness and faithfulness. This perspective helps us to see beyond the valley, trusting that there is hope and purpose on the other side. Finally, walking through the valley with courage allows us to become a testimony of God's faithfulness to others. As we trust Him in our struggles, we demonstrate His power and love to those around us. Our journey through the valley can inspire and encourage others, pointing them toward the shepherd who is always present and ready to lead them through their own valleys. Leaning on God's rod and staff for discipline and guidance is a vital aspect of our relationship with Him as our shepherd. The rod and staff symbolize two essential functions of God's care, protection, and direction. Understanding and embracing these tools in our spiritual lives allows us to experience the fullness of His guidance, correction, and safeguarding presence, even in the most challenging seasons. The rod is a symbol of authority and power, used by the shepherd to protect the sheep from harm. It serves as a weapon against predators and a means of enforcing order within the flock. In our lives, God's rod represents His protective authority over us. He actively defends us against spiritual attacks and unseen dangers, standing as a shield between us and anything that seeks to harm us. Leaning on His rod means trusting in His ability to guard our hearts, minds, and lives from threats we may not even recognize. At times, the rod is also used for discipline, correcting sheep when they wander off or put themselves in danger. This aspect of the rod may feel uncomfortable, but it is a vital expression of God's love for us. His discipline is never harsh or punitive. It is always for our benefit, designed to keep us on the path of righteousness and draw us closer to Him. Leaning on His rod involves humility, recognizing that His correction is a sign of His deep care and commitment to our growth. The staff, on the other hand, is a tool of guidance and rescue. With its distinct curve, the staff allows the shepherd to gently draw sheep back when they stray or find themselves in difficult situations. In our lives, God's staff represents His tender guidance and constant presence. He uses it to lead us along the right paths, ensuring that we stay close to Him and avoid dangers we may not see. Leaning on His staff means being sensitive to His leading and trusting that His ways are higher than ours. God's guidance through His staff is not always dramatic or forceful. It often comes in gentle nudges, quiet whispers, or subtle redirections. Learning to recognize and respond to His guidance requires a heart that is open and attentive to Him. This involves spending time in His Word, seeking His wisdom in prayer, and listening for His voice in the stillness. Leaning on His staff means placing our confidence in His ability to lead us, even when the way forward seems unclear or unfamiliar. The combination of the rod and staff reflects the balance of God's character. He is both firm and gentle, powerful and compassionate. His rod ensures that we are protected and disciplined, while His staff provides the comfort and direction we need. Leaning on both tools means embracing the entirety of His care, trusting that He knows what is best for us and will provide everything we need to navigate life's challenges. At times, leaning on God's rod and staff requires surrendering our own plans and desires. We may be tempted to go our own way or rely on our own understanding, but this often leads to frustration and confusion. Trusting in His tools means acknowledging that His ways are perfect and submitting to His authority. It is an act of faith to allow Him to guide and correct us, believing that His intentions are always for our good. Leaning on His rod and staff also brings a sense of security and peace. Knowing that God is actively involved in our lives, protecting us from harm and guiding us toward His purposes, allows us to rest in His care. We don't have to fear the unknown or worry about making mistakes because He is always there to redirect and restore us. This assurance gives us the confidence to move forward with trust, even when the path is difficult or uncertain. Rejoicing in God's abundant provision, even in the presence of challenges, is a powerful expression of faith and gratitude. Life is filled with moments of uncertainty, obstacles, and difficulties that can make it hard to see God's blessings. Yet, when we recognize His hand at work in every circumstance, we begin to understand that His provision is not limited by the challenges we face. It is in these moments that we learn to rejoice in His faithfulness and trust that He is meeting our needs in ways far beyond what we can imagine. God's provision is not just about material blessings. It encompasses every aspect of our lives. He provides strength when we feel weak, peace when we are anxious, and hope when we are discouraged. His provision meets us exactly where we are, addressing not only our physical needs, but also the deeper longings of our hearts. Rejoicing in His provision requires us to shift our focus from what we lack to what He has already given us, cultivating a spirit of gratitude and trust in His goodness. One of the most profound aspects of God's provision is its abundance. The psalmist declares that God prepares a table before us in the presence of our enemies. This imagery conveys a sense of overflowing blessing, even in the midst of adversity. The table represents not only sustenance but also fellowship and celebration. It is a reminder that God's provision is not merely about survival. It is about thriving and experiencing the fullness of His love and care. Rejoicing in this abundance allows us to rise above our circumstances and see the bigger picture of His faithfulness. The presence of challenges does not negate God's provision. In fact, it often highlights it. When we face difficulties, we are given the opportunity to rely on Him more deeply and experience His provision in ways we might not otherwise. Challenges can become the backdrop against which His power and faithfulness shine the brightest. Rejoicing in these moments means choosing to trust that He is working all things together for our good, even when we cannot see the outcome. Rejoicing in God's provision also involves acknowledging that He knows what we need better than we do. There are times when we may feel as though our prayers are unanswered or our needs are unmet, but God's perspective is infinitely greater than ours. He provides not only what we ask for, but also what is best for us, even when it doesn't align with our expectations. This requires a heart of surrender, trusting that His ways are higher and His timing is perfect. Gratitude is a key component of rejoicing in God's provision. When we take the time to reflect on His blessings, we become more aware of His presence and care in our lives. Gratitude shifts our perspective from scarcity to abundance, reminding us that He is always providing for us in ways both seen and unseen. This attitude of gratitude fuels our ability to rejoice, even in the face of difficulties, because we are reminded of His unchanging goodness and faithfulness. Rejoicing in God's provision also impacts the way we interact with others. When we recognize His blessings in our lives, we are inspired to share them with those around us. This could mean offering encouragement, extending generosity, or simply being a source of hope to someone in need. By celebrating His provision, we become a reflection of His love and grace, pointing others toward the One who provides for all our needs. Lastly, rejoicing in God's provision strengthens our faith and deepens our relationship with Him. It reminds us of His sovereignty and His ability to meet every need, no matter how great or small. As we rejoice in His care, our trust in Him grows, and we become more confident in His ability to provide for us in every season of life. This faith enables us to face challenges with peace and assurance, knowing that He is always working on our behalf. Holding fast to God's promise of goodness, mercy, and eternal fellowship is one of the most profound ways to anchor our faith. In a world that is often unpredictable and filled with uncertainty, God's promises provide an unshakable foundation. His goodness is not dependent on circumstances or our performance. It is an unchanging attribute of His character. Trusting in this goodness allows us to face life's challenges with confidence, knowing that He is always working for our ultimate benefit. God's promise of goodness reminds us that He is for us, not against us. This assurance is especially vital in difficult times when it may feel as though life is falling apart. His goodness does not mean that we will never experience pain or hardship, but it does mean that He will bring beauty and purpose out of even the most challenging situations. Holding on to this promise requires faith, as it often involves trusting in what we cannot yet see. It is a deliberate choice to believe that He is weaving every part of our story into a greater plan for His glory and our growth. The promise of mercy is equally transformative. Mercy is God's compassionate love extended to us in our weakness and failures. It is His willingness to forgive, restore, and redeem us even when we fall short. This promise assures us that we do not have to earn His love or strive for perfection to be accepted by Him. Instead, we can come to Him just as we are, trusting in His grace to cover our shortcomings and empower us to live for Him. Holding fast to this mercy gives us the freedom to live without fear of condemnation, resting in the assurance that His love is unconditional and everlasting. God's mercy also compels us to extend that same compassion to others. As we experience His forgiveness and kindness, our hearts are transformed, and we are inspired to reflect His mercy in our relationships. This is not always easy, especially when others have hurt or wronged us, but it is a powerful testimony of His work in our lives. By holding on to His promise of mercy, we are reminded that His grace is sufficient not only for us but also for those around us, enabling us to walk in love and unity. The promise of eternal fellowship with God is the ultimate hope that sustains us through every trial and season of life. It is the assurance that, no matter what we face, our destiny is secure in Him. This promise points us toward a future where there will be no more pain, sorrow, or separation, where we will dwell in His presence forever. Holding fast to this promise allows us to live with an eternal perspective, focusing not on the temporary difficulties of this life, but on the unending joy that awaits us in His presence. This eternal promise also shapes the way we live in the present. It reminds us that our time on earth is part of a greater story, and that every choice we make has eternal significance. Holding on to this hope encourages us to live with purpose, seeking to honor God in all that we do and sharing His love with others. It also provides comfort in times of loss, as we are reminded that our separation from loved ones who know the Lord is only temporary. Holding fast to God's promises requires intentionality and perseverance. It involves immersing ourselves in His Word where His promises are revealed and allowing His truth to shape our thoughts and actions. It means choosing to trust Him even when circumstances seem to contradict His promises, believing that His timing and ways are perfect. It also requires surrounding ourselves with a community of believers who can encourage and remind us of His faithfulness. As we hold tightly to these promises, we experience a peace that transcends understanding and a joy that is not dependent on our circumstances. This posture of trust allows us to walk through life with confidence, knowing that His goodness and mercy will follow us all the days of our lives, and that our ultimate home is with Him forever.